All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the final entry of this series, and I am thrilled to be at the end here. This has been a really fun project, but to be completely transparent, I am ready to move on. I am ready to move on to bigger and better things. We've been going at this, I can't remember, has it been since February or since January? Either way, it's been several months that we've been going through these streams, so today will be the last stream in this MLX Gradio series. We're going to put a button on everything. However, I will say this code isn't exactly polished. And what I mean by that in particular is the core functionality works, and I will demonstrate that the core functionality works. It's just that I got a little bit lazy and didn't complete some of the ancillary optional things that I was thinking about, and we'll talk about those. And then B, I transparently just ran into an issue where I guess I just don't understand Gradio well enough, where I ended up basically having to shove everything in one file, and it got long. So I'll just go ahead and show you. So this is the so like I do with all these streams is I create the full thing, and then we kind of work backwards, or like within the stream we kind of live do this. So this is the final product here in the end, but you can see it gets long. It got really long, way longer than I was expecting. So this all works, and you can see it's like 650 lines or so. And so let's actually go ahead and show you it. So this is the final product right here. This is what at the end of this stream, this is what you will be able to have. So you can see that we have a chat interaction here. So let's go ahead and ask a random question, I don't know. So you could see I was just using state capitals for an example here. Let's continue the trend. So what is the capital of Wisconsin? So Wisconsin being my neighbor to the north, since I live here in Illinois. Okay, so you can see here. After this process, and again, this is all locally. This is using MLX behind the scenes. This interface here is Gradio, and you can see here that within the interface here that we do get our response back from the AI appropriately. So yeah, and it talks a little bit about Wisconsin here. And then like this functionality isn't perfect, but you can actually see it actually did load the new chat history here. So so you can go back through each of these here. And so like, for example, if we wanted to come up here, you can see that I've already had my conversation with about Illinois, or if I wanted to continue this conversation, every time I click in here, we can continue on with the conversation. And just to prove this out, let's go ahead and ask a random question. How many counties are in this state? All right. And so we'll see if the answer is, I don't know what the answer is, but what I want to test out here is the answer different from something else? So, okay, so so I purposely did not put the state name there because I wanted to see that, I got somebody, hold on just a second. I got somebody at my door and I don't know. Okay, it must have just been Amazon. Sorry about that. So we're all good. Anyway, so if we come over to, all right, so it's at 102, and it did recognize that Illinois is here. And so just like, let's go back over to this one. Let's go and ask how many counties are in this state. And so you can see here, I've actually done it two different ways. So you can actually just hit enter on your keyboard, or you could press this little arrow key. And so I'll go ahead and submit it this way. And then you will be able to see here in a second that this should load appropriately. Okay, so yeah, Ohio, blah, 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 88 counties. So you can see that all this functionality works. So this is the end product. Now I'll tell you, so the part that I did not complete and I just got lazy, and I might go back and on the side do it someday, but I'm not going to do any more streams on this topic, is this page here. Like we built out the UI for this, but this actually, even though I'm sliding this around here or sliding this around here, this actually does nothing. I actually, I probably could have figured it out. It's just, I got lazy. Like I said, I really just want to move on, and we'll talk about what I want to move on to toward the end of the stream. But yeah, so this is the final product here. So let's go ahead and close out of this. All right, I'm going to close out of this, and let's pull up our working copy, the one that we were working on, just to show you where we left off. All right, so cd stream, Gradio stream, gradio.py. Okay, so this is the file that we left off on, and I did refactor a tiny bit of it, but just to show you. So let me go ahead and refresh this. So you could see here, like that everything looks as if it's the completed product. It's just that there's no functionality that works here. So if I type in something here and I try to hit enter, if I try to click this thing, it does nothing. Nothing happens here. So what and again, that's just because we have not programmed all this in quite yet. And then I guess the other thing I want to show real quick is at the end of this, so you could see like we are going to be like saving the chat history as this big long JSON file. And so you can see here where the line that delineates screen. So this is my get noting to me that we have some new content here. This is exactly what we just did. So you can see we asked how many counties were in the state, and then you can see the actual response, and then you can see the metadata associated with the response, including like the timestamp here, for example. And so let's recap what we've covered in the stream so far, just at a high level. So the first stream in the series, we covered MLX as a whole. And just as a reminder, MLX is a utility that's created by Apple for both the Python and Swift coding languages that allows you to do deep learning stuff directly on the Apple Silicon hardware, which is very, very efficient and stuff. So I'm running my MacBook here. My personal MacBook Pro is an M1 Pro. So this is the baseline MacBook Pro. I think I got it at Best Buy, so there's nothing fancy about this machine. 16 gigabytes of RAM, pretty typical. In fact, so I actually got the new iPad the other day, and it's funny, this thing has the M4 chip in it, so it's so thin. It's so thin, it's got the, I love iPads, but anyway. Yeah, so we are running the model through MLX. And then we talked about LangChain. So LangChain is doing a lot of the coordination behind the scenes for us here. And then we talked a little bit more specifically about LangChain history, although we are going to come back to that because I did refactor some things and I want to make sure that we are on the same page with that. And then finally, in the last stream, we covered Gradio. And that Gradio is just this user interface that we built here. Nice thing about Gradio is for somebody like me who doesn't know something like JavaScript and React or something like that, I'm a Python developer, and I can still create a nice looking application just using Python through Gradio. And I don't want to knock, so the other big one is Streamlit. I don't want to knock Streamlit. To be honest, I personally just haven't used it. So I think Streamlit could probably be just as effective as Gradio, but my personal preference is just Gradio. So let's go ahead and cover the history thing really quick here. And this is going to be this stream, because there's so much code here. Usually, as you know, I like to actually like hand code some of this stuff. There's going to be a lot of copying and pasting this stream, just to be completely honest. Okay, so let's cover the flow here again, because I did, like I said, I refactored some things, and this notebook here, this chat history notebook, this really represents the core functionality of how this whole thing works behind the scenes. So as it's noted in the high level flow here, so what we do is we load the chat history from the file if it exists. If not, then we instantiate a new schema to be able to add things to the chat history file. We set a conversation ID, so we're using the Python UUID here, so that just allows us to generate a unique ID. We manage the conversation back and forth. So again, as you saw, we can ask questions to the AI, and then finally we can start a new conversation, or we can load an existing conversation. So as I noted in the chat history, how you could click on the different things here. So let's go ahead and cover a little bit of what this code is going on, what's going on with this code here. So you can see here, we just got some default values or some values that we're just setting for locations and stuff. And then this was another thing that we covered in part of the previous stream. So I've created this custom class object to be able to manage our MLX model parameters. This may have been overkill, to be honest. I don't know if I necessarily needed to create a class object out of it, but we did. So that's what that is. And then, a couple streams ago, you might recall that when we were working with LangChain specifically, that LangChain actually did not offer an MLX plugin, if you will. And that changed. So that actually changed like 2 weeks after I did the stream. And LangChain added one of these things. So that is what this is doing. So the way this works is you have to pass it this MLX pipeline LLM object, the directory. So this directory represents the Mistral model that we downloaded and quantized as part of a stream a while back. Again, we're not going to cover that, because if we recovered every single thing that we've covered in every stream, we'd be here all night. So that is that. The only thing I don't like about how this is implemented is you can see that and and this is part of why I didn't bother trying to figure this out, is that whenever you want to change the pipeline keyword arguments, so or the model parameters, so like the temperature or the max tokens here, you have to reinstantiate the object, which is not the case if you use like Azure, or if you use like the OpenAI API or anything else like that. With those, you can actually send in like the things like the temperature on the fly. So I don't like the way this is implemented. Like, can we work around it? Sure. It's just that I got lazy about it. And then I actually did demonstrate in here by commenting out this code. The whole reason that we're using LangChain is that you can swap out the model interface if you'd like. So you could see here that I have it just commented out, but and I did test this all out using my Azure OpenAI. I'm so used to saying Azure OpenAI because I use Azure OpenAI at work, but it's actually just OpenAI. I'm just using the bare bones OpenAI here. But yeah, like this worked like without problem. And I think we actually did demonstrate that. All right. So how did things get a little bit different? So I think some of this is a little bit of the same, but it gets a little bit different further on down here. So let's just recap what this is doing here with this line here. So this is the actual inference chain itself. And okay, now I'm remembering what we did here. So in the previous iteration, in like last stream, what we had done is we had baked in the history stuff here because I wasn't thrilled with how LangChain was recommending how to do it. However, now that I've gone back and like I reread the documentation, I was wrong. That was on me. The way that LangChain actually recommends it is pretty slick. And so that's how I refactored it. And we'll cover that on down here. But I just want to cover here again. So what we did with this inference chain is we have our chat prompt template. So this is just the system message kind of thing. And then like, if you recall here, we had to correct for the no system models. And what I mean by that is when you have I call it the meta prompt. A lot of it is technically like the system prompt, but basically it's like the tone that you set for the overall conversation. Apparently, if you try to invoke either the Mistral series of models or the Llama series of models, which use similar architecture, it doesn't like those system messages. So we had to create this special function here called the correct for the no system models. And again, we're just covering stuff that we already done. We had to. So yeah, we had to basically like take the system message and refactor it in as a human message. And because the model's always expecting that back and forth of a human message, AI message, we also had to add in a dummy thing here just to get that working. So let's look, moving on further down the chain. So then we have just the model itself. So nothing's particularly special there. Now the MLX chat interface thing does not update the AI response metadata in and of itself. So we have to do that manually. So that's what this final step here at the end is representing, this runnable lambda. So that is what this is here is doing, is basically saying, okay, yes, this chat model produced the response that we need, but we need to stick the metadata on the end there. So nothing particularly fancy here. And you can see as we invoke this, it works just fine. So let's keep moving on down. So this is where things get a little bit different. So how the way that LangChain recommends you use the manage history is with this thing called the runnable with message history here. So I actually call this just the inference chain with history. And the way it works is you pass in a runnable. Now, just very briefly, I'm not going to cover it too deep in here, but a runnable in the LangChain context means basically a very specific sort of object within LangChain that produces a consistent set of inputs and outputs. Now, it's not always the exact same inputs and outputs, but it's consistent within the LangChain framework. So in our case, our runnable is going to be the inference chain that we were just covering above. This is where things get a little bit different, though. So this is where we actually have to instantiate this thing called get session history. A get session history custom function here. And what it's doing is, so you can see that we this is our LC here stands for LangChain. Here, let me make this bigger for y'all. That's probably a little bit hard for you to see. There you go. And by the way, I am taking questions on LinkedIn. LinkedIn or YouTube. Still don't know how to do that on X. Eventually I will figure that out. But anyway, so this is just an empty dictionary object. And basically what this thing is doing here is whenever you pass in a session ID, LangChain is going to manage this for you so that basically as this dictionary continues to get populated out, then it's going to be like where it's a key, which is the actual session ID itself. And then the value is all the conversation and metadata stuff. So just to make that clear, so let's go into my JSON file here. Why did it close on my notebook? I don't like that. All right, let me get back to my notebook here. Where did we leave off at. Oops, I'm looking at the wrong file. All right, hold on. Let me find where we were just at. Sorry about that. Okay, so all right, so coming back to here, and actually let me do a split right, just to make it side by side. Okay. So what it's doing here, so this LC user conversation thing here is actually this over here. And so you can see, well, it's actually not precisely this, it's the LangChain version of this, but it's like the idea is similar here, where basically LangChain is saying, okay, if you pass in this unique key, we'll manage all this conversation and history and stuff here for you. And I hope I'm explaining that well. I know that I imagine it's probably a little bit confusing what I just said there, but like, so just to drive this home, so like looking at this here, so when we pass in, like when we want to invoke the model then here, we just pass in the input key and then we pass in the history key. And remember, the history key, let's come back on here. This is just a review from last time. In order to make this work, we have to pass in as part of the chat prompt template this messages placeholder. And this is basically loading all the previous message history back into the chat prompt here, so that way the model has the context of the conversation and what's been going on before. And that's why we note the variable name of history here. So let's come back on down. And the way that this thing gets invoked is very similarly to if, like, all right, so let's come back to here, just reviewing the inference chain without the history. The way that we invoke this thing is very similar. So you can see that when we invoke it, we pass in the input, and the one additional thing that we do have to pass in is we have to pass in the configuration. And so the way that, the session ID. And the way that we pass in the session ID is passing in this config, where we pass in this configurable, and then we note the session ID, and then we note the actual session ID itself. So here I created a couple demo IDs. And again, originally I did not include this because I was confused by it, and to be honest, it is still a tiny bit confusing the very first time you do it. Like, I don't like the fact that this is called a runnable, for example. Like, I understand why it is, it's just not super clear. But but you could see here, like, this all works just dandy. And so moving further on down here, this was I called this an optional section, but I actually did include this in the final product. What I thought was a really nice touch was, so I think it's like the ChatGPT interface, and I'm a Perplexity user now, and I don't remember what ChatGPT does precisely, but I believe when you start a new conversation and you ask a question, then like in the chat history itself, like if you want to go back and select one of your further old conversations, it would give like a summary title of it. And so the way that we did this, and actually, I don't think I covered this as part of the code last time, but I created this prompt here, basically saying, okay, the text delineated by the triple backticks below represents a conversation, blah, blah, blah. And basically, I did a little bit of prompt engineering to try to get it to produce a summary title. And this, with the MLX model, is hit or miss. I would say 4 out of 5 times it works. The 5th time it does work. It's just that it adds way more text. It's a little bit chatty, and I think that's just the nature of the MLX quantized model, because you don't see that if you were to use like GPT-4 or whatever, for example. And yeah, so then we just created because this is just kind of its own standalone thing. We just created this in and of itself, and then and so then if we wanted to that was a terrible explanation, but basically, like, if we wanted to generate the summary title, we just pass in both the current session history with the demo ID, and then we also pass in the chat model here, and that gives us the summary title. And so you could see here with my examples, since I was asking the state capitals just to keep things simple, it created summary titles of capital city of Illinois, Springfield, capital city of California, Sacramento. I think that one of these in here actually demonstrated the kludginess that I was talking about here. Let me see if I can find the example. Okay, maybe not. Maybe I deleted that. Okay, because eventually, this file that we're looking at here, we will eventually delete this just to demonstrate that when we want to create something from scratch, it'll create this file for you and create this whole setup for you. Ooh, man. All right, so let's go back into the notebook. All right, so speaking of that user schema history, the schema is actually pretty straightforward itself. So we have just as at the high level schema, the only thing that we're capturing is the user ID, which I just called default username. I don't know. This doesn't do anything at all. I just kind of wanted to demonstrate how you might think about structuring your data if you were to build something like this for yourself. And then we have the chat history. And then as we go through the chat history, then we start appending each of these different conversations by this unique ID here. And again, we are generating this unique ID using the Python UUID default library there. Okay, so yeah, and then I don't know if you all recall, like I had some issue there where like if I was trying to copy the user history, and I wanted to copy this, but I made updates to this particular object, it kept wanting to update my schema as a whole. So the only way I could get around that was doing this little Python trick where you just do this deep copy thing, and then that kind of breaks the dependency, if you will, on the original object here. So that's why we had to do that deep copy. And so moving further on down, so then as the history that is being saved there to the this LC current session history object, that dictionary, it is being saved as LangChain objects. So the LangChain objects are the AI message, the system message, the human message. So if we're going to do everything in JSON, we need to get everything from the LangChain format to the JSON format. So that's what this custom function here is doing. It's basically looking, okay, if the message type here, or wait, which one is this one? LangChain to, yeah, so this one's LangChain to JSON. It's basically saving all this stuff out and then to the JSON file appropriately. Well, I think that's just extracting the JSON. I don't know if it necessarily saves it. I think, yeah, so that's what I did here. So then I created this master function here that basically combines every single thing that we talked about so far in one function. And so we call it invoke model. And so let's just review here what's going on. So we instantiate our inference chain, and then we instantiate the inference chain with the history thing here. We invoke the model, and then we do some extra stuff on it. So we save the JSON stuff, and then if this is the first time we've started the conversation, then this is where we also want to add the system prompt that is being used at the time of inference, and then we also want to add the summary title, and that is where we are using our custom function here, the generate summary title, to generate that. Okay, all right. So then I just cleared everything out here and just to test it out. And then finally, we have this final function here that is loading the chat history from file. So again, this is the chat history as a JSON file. But if we want to continue to use it within the chat interface, then we need to get it back into the LangChain format that we just converted it back from. So this is basically, so like I was saying, we had this function here, or I'm sorry, it wasn't this function. It was this function here that is going from LangChain to JSON. So this is basically the inverse function down here. So we went from LangChain to JSON. This is going from JSON to LangChain. And then there's that. And then the rest of this notebook, and this notebook is up on my GitHub if you want to review it. The rest of this notebook is just demonstrating that this does work. But you can kind of see that this is all this code here is the backbone of the entire thing that we're going to be building out in Gradio. It's just yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the kludginess here. So because in the original stream, you might recall that we actually had a utils.py file that we were sticking things in, kind of like, as a help function sort of thing. And so let's how do I want to approach this here? I'm trying to think here. Let me think for a second. Yeah, I don't know how I want to approach this. Okay, well, we're just going to start copying and pasting stuff. and I will explain things along the way. It's just, like I said, I usually like to type this all out by hand, but if we typed all this out by hand, we'd be here all day. There's just so much code to get through today. So actually, okay, let me go ahead and review the master file here. So this is the master file. This is the one that's already baked out and everything. The thing that I'm not happy with is that I had to shove everything in a single Python file. And you might be asking, why is that? And I just talked about like how we did have that utils file. And the reason for this is, all right, so I'll just come on down to the bottom and we'll talk about this and we'll start implementing things. All right, so this should all look familiar. It's just got, this is the same Gradio kind of code that we have in our other file here. It's just got a few extra annotated comments. So these things down here are actually the behavior functions of the different user interface elements. So what do I mean by that? So what I mean by that is, all right, so let's just look at the UI here. So we have this arrow button over here that you can click to submit. your prompt. I called that the submit prompt button here. So what you can do is you have your submit prompt button .click, and then what you do is you have your function name that you want to invoke. So remember, I created this master function called the invoke model function, and then we pass in the inputs, and then we pass in the and then we have to get out the outputs. Now here's the problem that I ran into, and there probably is a way to work around this, but I could not figure it out, and I just got lazy with it. I don't know how to, so these are all Gradio objects here. So this is, the prompt text is representing this text box where you can type anything in. The chatbot is representing this user interface up here that will hold the conversation back and forth. And then the chat history represents this object over here on the left that will save off the chat history. If you were to pass in another variable that is not necessarily a Gradio object, then it doesn't like that. And so I think you might be seeing what my problem is then. So the problem is like, okay, well, I have all these different things that I need to pass in here. So how do I do it? So what I was starting to do was I was just starting to reference things as global variables over in the utils.py file, but for some reason Gradio didn't like that. So it is this is the thing that I was calling the unpolished part. I don't like the way this is implemented. I think this is bad coding practice. But I'm lazy and I want to move on. Well, I guess I'm not lazy. I just really want to move on. Like, this has been a fun project, but it's like, to be honest, I almost didn't want to complete it. I have that much of a desire just to move on. So this is not ideal. And if you don't know what global function, like the global functions are, it basically is saying, okay, if I set, so like this is the a function right here. And you might recall, like, so if you set a variable outside of the function context, then that variable does not necessarily get referenced within the context of a function. In order to do that, you have to set this global thing here. And so you can see that's why I have so many different global things here, and again, I just don't like this. Like, I think that's just really bad coding practice. And then, like I said, I had to shove everything in a single Python file, which made it a little over 650 lines of code. Now, granted, I'm a heavy annotator, so I don't know how much of that is actually truly functional versus me just being verbose. But yeah, so I'm not thrilled with that. But like I said, it works, and I demonstrated that it works. So what are you going to do? All right. So let's go ahead and just start copying and pasting stuff into, so, okay. Again, so I guess one thing that I had to do just to get this working is, just as a reminder, the Gradio application, and I think Streamlit has the same problem too. Neither of them have a native object that necessarily handles chat history well. So this is my Kluge way of handling it, and that is using the Gradio data frame object. Let me just go ahead and paste in that function to show you like what that looks like. And actually, let me. All right, so I'm gonna create this. All right, so let me go ahead and start pasting stuff in here, and I'll talk through it as we go. All right, so this is all right, I'm gonna have to import copy, and in fact, I'm gonna do all of our imports up here, and then we'll talk through all these imports as we get further along. Okay, so those are all of our imports there. All right, so what is this doing here? So this is really just starting the new chat history. And this is if you do not already have a chat history already created. So in my case, I already do have this history, and you'll see how this is referenced as part of this next function here. So let me go ahead and paste in this next function. I feel like I'm cheating today because like I said, y'all know I usually do handwrite this code, but there's just so much of it today. Like, and I'm so scared of messing things up because when I was doing my code in my master file over here, like I screwed up so many times, and I just don't want to do that today. Like I'm not feeling that today. So you can see, okay, so this is what, did I copy that full code? No, I did not copy that full code. I was going to say that looks like it's incomplete. I know we got a return thing here, but that is not complete. Okay, so this next function here. So this is the same function that I was demonstrating earlier. So what we're doing here is we're passing in the JSON location here where we're expecting. And again, we did instantiate at the top. I'm just saving it in my data directory. Nothing particularly fancy there. And so I'm checking to see, does that thing exist? So does this file exist? And if not, then this is where we have to invoke this function. And this is really just the simple, again, the deep copy from the thing that we were interacting with before. Yeah, to go ahead and start that. But let's say we do have a file that exists. So what we do here is we instantiate this dictionary object that's going to hold all this stuff. And then we are going to load the JSON file itself. And then we basically just got to do an iteration over the thing to extract all the bits and then save them out as the appropriate messages here. So you can see here that in the like here, for example, this human message, and then this AI message, these are LangChain objects here. And the way that we work with them is we just set the content to equal whatever the content is. So you can see here that we're pulling it out of this dictionary over here. And then at least for the AI message, we're also pulling out the metadata. And then we save it all back to the history. So that's what this function is doing. So it looks hairy. It's not really. And again, it's probably because I'm really verbose with my comments and my variable names that it looks way worse than it is. But I don't know, like I hate when people use variable names like foo or f or like two character things that are not descriptive. Like, come on, like in 6 months, are you really going to remember that? Like, I won't. So that, like, if I've said this before, the annotations are for me. Like, I guess they help you in the end, but they're more so for me. So in 3 or 4 months, when I got to reference what the heck I did here, I can just read my plain language comments too. All right. So let's keep moving on. All right. So, so this is the part that I wanted to talk about a little bit more here. So in order to get so let's come back here for a second. All right, so in order to get this working, I don't know why it's showing us like this now. Well, you can see here that we only want just the one field of the data frame. We only want just the summary title. We don't want anything else to show here. The trouble with this is, let's say you have a data frame that has two columns in it. You have the session ID, and then you have the summary title that represents the conversation session. If I were to surface that data frame as here, it would show the 2 columns, including the conversation ID, which I personally think is just not a good user experience. I think from a user perspective, I don't want to see that unique ID. I don't care what that unique ID is. I just want the functionality to work, if you know what I mean. And so so the way I handled it here is by creating 2 different data frames. So I created the actual chat history data frame, which it only contains the chat history and the summary titles. And then I created this other data frame called the reference data frame. And so this reference data frame contains the chat history titles, but it also contains the session ID too. And so the way this comes, and we'll demonstrate how this comes into value, but basically what this is doing is it allows us to display this in a user-friendly format. But when we actually need to load one of the historical conversations, we can do so by referencing this, it's almost like an intermediary transition kind of table. I don't know how you want to describe it, but like that's what this is. And again, this is probably not the best way to do it, but this is the best way I could find how to do it in Gradio, because there is no native history object otherwise. All right, so I'm just going to paste a lot more things in here. So I call this section the initial load section. So let's go ahead and paste all this in here, and let's talk through a little bit more. So you can see here that, again, we are loading the chat history from the file. So, and again, I think I glossed over this. If the chat history is not available, then we just start creating like empty versions of these things. So you can see here that we have just empty, if the chat history, it does not exist. Why am I getting the squiggly line there? Is it because it's probably because I stuck this below it. Let me do a quick refactor here. All right, let me put this up higher. Okay. And then, again, I won't re-review that. We've covered that before. Okay, so initial load values. So this is how we are using the UUID. So it actually does not begin with the conv ID like this. I actually set that specifically. You don't have to do that. I just thought it was a nice touch. So if you come over and look at these, for example, so you have the conv ID, and then you actually have the UUID itself. So this is and the way that you do that is extremely simple. So it actually does it by dashes. It does it by dashes, like the UUID. So I just did a string replace here to replace all the dashes with underscores. And again, I didn't necessarily need to do that. I just thought it was a nice touch. And then you can see here, we've already kind of discussed this before, but the loading in of the actual large language model itself. So this is the MLX object that we use in LangChain specifically to actually load the stuff. And then we have our chat model, and then we have the actual chat prompt template. So this is where we are setting the system message appropriately from the MLX model parameters class object. And then again, we have this messages placeholder here that is empty at the beginning. But as history or as more chats from the conversation get added more time over time, then as we continue to invoke the model, we will slide in that history as part of this message placeholder here, per the variable name history. Okay, so let's keep coming on down here. All right, so we got a lot more copying and pasting to go. So we've now moved into again, this is just more review. We're moving into the LangChain helper functions here. So we have our first helper function. Again, this is just the correction for the no system models. We already talked about that. Then we have to update for the metadata. So I'm just gonna copy this in here. Copy in for the metadata. Could you imagine if I tried typing all this? We'd be here all day. Like, this ended up being like, this history thing actually ended up being way more complex than I thought it was. I'm glad I went through the exercise though. I think it was like, I learned a ton, and it was extremely helpful knowledge to learn. It just, I bit off more than I could chew. I guess we'll phrase it that way. And then, okay, so the next one down here, we have the generate summary title. So this is, again, how we are going to actually generate that summary title per each of the new chat invocations here. And again, you can see that I put some robust docstring documentation so you can understand what's going on here. So again, we set our prompt for how we're going to prompt the model to produce that summary title here, using a little bit of fancy footwork prompt engineering. I can't remember if I covered this in a stream or if this was some other context at work or something. But one thing I do want to highlight here is the triple backticks. So this is a little bit of an aside, but I think this is worth bringing up. One of the concerns with prompt engineering in particular is this thing called prompt injection. And basically what prompt injection is you can, at the end of this, you can imagine, let's say, ignore all previous instructions, and then you just get a new set of instructions. So how do you avoid poisoning that? So the way that you avoid poisoning that is you actually use delimiters. And when I mean delimiters, it could be basically any way that you can separate out the text appropriately. And like I actually, I did call it out here. So the text delineated by triple backticks. So basically like if somebody were to put malicious prompt text in here, you are far less inclined to actually poison the prompt, because the triple, like this first part of the prompt here is saying, okay, anything inside the triple backticks is context, but I shouldn't necessarily look at it as the instructions per se. And again, the only reason I want to bring that up is because as you are doing your own prompt engineering, I would highly encourage you consider the delineation. So I personally use triple backticks here. You can use triple quotes. You can use anything else you'd like. I just personally prefer the triple backticks because you don't typically use triple backticks in any other context. So it's kind of like almost like a reserved sort of thing to be able to manage these things appropriately. All right, so coming on down, just a little prompt engineering to actually produce that title. And yeah, so I forgot about this. So my MLX Mistral 7B quantized model here, every time I produce a title, it keeps wanting to do this baloney where it would begin with the word title or the lowercase title. And so that's why I specifically added some code to strip that out because I have no idea why it keeps wanting to do that. Funny. I forgot that I wrote that. All right. And then, so next, coming on down, so we're starting to get into, again, some of the stuff that we've already covered before, but like the functions to actually manage the session history. So here is the object that we use to actually manage the session history. Remember, we want to create that object that is like the inference pipeline with the history, and you have to pass in like the runnable thing, and we'll see it again here in a second. But basically, we need this as a helper function to do that appropriately. And then we have the link chain to the JSON session object here. So this is, again, taking the lane chain conversation history and then turning it into something that we can save as a JSON file later on down. Okay, so that finishes out that section. So now we move into what I like moving back into Gradio. So one thing I want to highlight here is, so we'll start adding some. I actually probably will handwrite some of this code here in a little bit, but as we. No, I'm getting ahead of myself. My apologies. All right, so let's go ahead and I'm going to create another section header here. I'm going to call this the Gradio function behavior. And so basically here, Gradio function behavior. And basically what this is these are the functions that we are going to, or I guess I called them behavior function, Gradio behavior functions. So these are the functions that we are actually going to directly invoke from the user interface. So the big one here, this is the one that really is like the beating heart of this whole thing, if you will, is the invoke model function. And I'm gonna copy and paste it because there is actually a little bit more code in here that I had to add beyond the Jupyter notebook. And oh my gosh, if I can highlight it correctly on my other screen. Okay, so let's walk through this because, again, like I said, this is the beating heart of the entire full thing. All right, so we are passing in 3 different objects. So again, when you invoke the Gradio functions, you can only pass in Gradio objects, and which is why I'm having to do all this kludgy business of the global baloney over here. So we're passing in the text itself, so that is represented by the prompt text. So this is the text that we are wanting to get a response on. We are passing in the chatbot. The chatbot, and again, just to drive this home, the chatbot is just this here, is this chat back and forth iteration kind of thing here. And then finally, the third thing that we were passing in is the chat history here, and that is going to be represented by this object. So let's walk through and talk about what this function is doing. Because again, this function in particular, this is the crux of everything. This is the thing that makes the whole thing work. Okay, so we've already covered this. This is a little bit of a repeat. So we set up our inference chain. We set up our inference chain with history. We invoke the model. We save out the user history, or we extract the user history from LangChain into JSON, and then we add the system prompt. Now this is where things got a tiny bit different. So at the point when we produce the summary title, recall that we also want to update the chat history then too. And so the way that we do that is we can actually just simply use our same function that I created from before to load in the chat history. And then we will pass this back out at the end here. So you can see here that we'll actually, I'm sorry, it's this object here. We'll actually pass this back out as the frontal object. And that is to actually resurface the thing, or resurface the chat history with the newly updated stuff inside of it. So we do have to clear out here's another thing I did want to cover. We've covered this before in a previous stream, but I want to touch base on it again. When you want to add things to the Gradio chat interface, you have to do it in tuple pairs. And what I mean by tuple pairs is, it's got to be a tuple, and it's got to have the input, the human text itself, and it has to have the completion or the response or whatever you want to call it, and it has to be in this syntax like we've shown here. So it's not complicated. It's just that I want to really drive it home. So we're again taking the prompt text, and then we're getting the content from the object, and then that is how we actually surface it back as part of the Gradio object, and then we actually do the final return here, and then we do clear out the prompt text for the next user input. Again, if there is one thing that I recommend you all go back and review, it's this function here. If you understand this function here, you understand the whole thing. This is, again, by far the most important function of this entire thing. All right, so we do have a couple other simple functions here. So actually this is how I'm managing the actual load of the history here. And what I mean by that is so when we go over here and we click on one of these things in here, and now this is, I don't know, do I not have this? Okay. Whatever. Oh, that's because I don't have this set up yet. That's right. Basically what's going on here is, so when we click on one of the rows of, and this is the other part that also kind of confused me here. So you can see here that so Gradio only allows you to pass in Gradio objects. And so when we invoke this function, we're allowed to pass in the chatbot, but then you can see here that we actually, they sneak in this little thing called the Gradio select data thing. And that took me freaking forever to figure out. But basically, when you select the specific row in the data frame, it will tell us, it will be stored as part of this select data object. So the select data object has the index thing here. So we have an index value that we can pull out of the selected row. And then basically we can go into our reference table here, and then we can get the session ID associated to that. So again, I'm not thrilled with how this works, but the reason this works is because we have two different data frames. We have the chat history data frame, which only contains the summaries, and then we have the reference data frame, which contains the summaries and the session history. And the way this works is because every time we are updating one of these things, we're updating them both, and they all always have the same row order, or they should always have the same order. It makes me uncomfortable though, because I'm not sure that, I'm pretty sure that it would always maintain the same row order. But if it didn't, then this code would break. But I'm too lazy to really, really try to harden that down. Yeah. So you could see what I did here. So basically, as we, so the way this works then is, okay, so after we select the row and we get this session ID associated to the conversation. So let's say, for example, I wanted to load this conversation here. So we're going to reference this, and then basically we're going to iterate over each of these pairs here to load it back into the Gradio interface. So you can see here that we have a list here that we are going to continually append things to. So for I in range between 0 and the max length, and we're taking a step of 2. So this is basically saying, okay, for every 2 pairs of these things that we go through, and it's always going to be the 2 pairs. It's always going to be user assistant, user assistant, user assistant. It's never going to change. So and again, well, I guess you would want to add a validation step here. And again, this is unpolished code, but golly, do I want to move on. So let's keep going. Yeah, and then we need to, so we added all those things in here, and then you can see we just create a new chatbot object, and then we set the value to equal the loaded conversation, and then we just ensure that whenever we're interacting with the session ID, we need to update the current session ID to be whatever the session ID that we selected from, so that way when we continue our conversation, it is appending back to the respective conversation that we have selected appropriately. Okay. And again, so I had to get kind of creative with that because unfortunately there is not a native object that Gradio can do for that. I am happy with how it turned out. Like, it's not the prettiest thing in the world, but it's nice. Like, it works. And it looks halfway decent too, I think. All right. So, and then finally we have one more function here. And this one's going to be a really simple function. So this is the start new interaction function. Okay. All right, so the start new interaction function here is basically when you click this button, what happens? All right, so what happens is we have to update the session ID with a brand new session ID. So again, we're just using the UUID here again to create a new session ID. We do need to clear out the chatbot interface. So the way that we do that is we just create a new chatbot object, and then we just pass in an empty list, and then we return the chatbot. So now, how do we wire these things together? So how do we take some of these objects and wire them up to the actual interface elements here? So like, for example, how do I wire this function up to this button? Well, simply enough, let's just come back down in here, and I'll go ahead and hand type this code because we're actually approaching the end. I am disappointed that I didn't get to hand type all this code, but I'm looking at the clock here. We've already been going for this stream is going to end at 1 hour. If I typed it all out, we'd be here at least two or 3 hours. And it's nice outside. I want to go on a walk or something. So anyway, okay, so we need to start adding our functions down here. So the way that we do this, let's go ahead and do the new chat button. So we have the new chat button. Oops, sorry about that. Oops. Let me go ahead and create a couple more spaces. So so we call this the new chat button up here. So you can see, so start a new interaction, and that's how this works. Do I have this thing running right now? I guess I do, but it doesn't seem like it's working appropriately. So if we do new chat button, So there's these different interactions that you can do based off of the different objects. So actually, let me go ahead and demonstrate that through the doc. Oops, why did I click cancel of full things there? Gradio app. All right, so let's go to the documentation. Let's go to the blocks. And if you want to see what each thing does, so this is, again, a button here. So what you can do is you can go to the event listeners over here, and it'll tell you everything you can do. So it looks like for this one, it just has the click function. But let me pull another one out here that I know has multiple things to it, I think. I'm pretty sure it's got multiple things. Yeah, so like this text box, for example. If it has different things based off of what action you were taking at the time. So if you're doing like so the submit here, that is when you hit the enter key. So actually we will be using this one, or if we have the select or we have the input, like then we can take action appropriately here. So for the button, obviously we're going to be passing in, or we're going to be doing the click functionality. And then all these behaviors always have at least 3 different components. You have the FN, the function itself. So this is going to be the function that we're going to want to invoke. So this is this is how we wire this thing up to here. So we actually want to reference this function here. So it's going to be function. So FN equals that. Then we need to pass in the inputs. And again, this is where I just don't understand. I couldn't figure this out. There probably is a better way to do this. But with inputs, you can only pass in Gradio objects. You can't pass in typical inputs or typical variables that are like the data frame, the pandas data frames, for example. I can't pass them in this way. I don't know how to pass them in this way, which is why we had to do that Kluge global business. And again, I just got lazy. We probably could have figured that out. But yeah, so what are we passing in here? I think we just need to pass in the chatbot. Yeah. So we're going to pass in the chatbot. And then as our outputs, we are going to do the chatbot. Okay, so simple enough. All right, so now what do we do with the next couple ones? So what do we need to do? We need to add, I'll go ahead and close this out. So we need to add the text box here. So the text box I've called, so this object here is called the prompt text. We also need to add the same functionality for this button here, and then we need to wire up the select thing over here. So let's go ahead and work on the submissions. So I'm going to do prompt text.submit. So this is when you this is the prompt text object right here. Did I call prompt text, or did I call something different? Submit prompt button, user prompt. I'm going to change this prompt text. Okay, because I think that's how I have it written in the other one. So yeah, we have this object here, and then we submit, and same idea here. So we need to pass. So the function, we're going to pass in the invoke model, and then we need to pass in 3 different objects here. So inputs are going to be the chatbot. Well, which one was the first one? Oh, I guess the prompt text itself, the chatbot, and then the chat history. And then what are we getting back out? Well, we're getting back out the same thing. All right. Oops. Outputs. Outputs. Oh my gosh, I don't like that. That's not aligned properly. Prompt. I'm such a stickler for alignment. So when I used to be a business architect, like I had to create a lot of these diagrams in Visio, and like I said, I'm a huge stickler for design, because I think I've talked about before how I wanted to be a graphic designer at one point. And so like one of my coworkers was asking me like, how do you make these things all aligned so appropriately? And so if you've used Visio before, you know it's a like a checkerboard grid. And I just said, well, you got to count the number of boxes between the spaces. And so she gave me such a hard time about that. It's like, you count all the boxes? Like, yes, I do, because I am that much of a stickler on these things. So that's why I got to have these things aligned. All right, so we created that. And then so again, this is going to serve this exact same functionality as this button here. So what do we got to do? Well, basically this exact same thing, except, so I'm just going to copy and paste this down here, except we're going to do click. And then we are going to do the, what do we call this? The submit prompt button. Okay, so well, again, I gotta fix my alignments. Oh my gosh, Richard Hendricks would be so mad at me right now. That was a Silicon Valley joke. So in case you didn't catch what that joke was, so I just did a couple spaces over, which there was an episode of Silicon Valley where the main character, this is an extremely minor spoiler. He went on a date with this girl who was also a software developer like himself, and they were writing code together. And he was noticing when his girlfriend was writing her code, whenever she was trying to like align things just like I did, she used the space bar, and whereas he preferred the tabs, and like it bothered him so much that he ended up dissolving the relationship over it. That is such a great show. Like if you've not seen that show, go watch it. It's on. You can watch it on Max, like the HBO service. Anyway, so we have these three functions, and then what do we got to do? So we got the new chat button, we got the prompt text, but oh yeah, then we have to do the whole data frame thing. So then we have our chat history. So chat history. So then when we want to select something, so this is when we select one of the rows in the data frame, we are going to pass in fn equals the load existing conversation, and then we are going to pass in, what are we going to pass in? Hold on, I'm just looking here real quick. Yeah, it's just the looking at my notes. Yeah, it's just the chatbot. So inputs are going to be the chatbot. Inputs are going to be the chatbot. And this is I guess this is the one that was a little bit confusing. That's why I had to reference my notes. So just as a reminder here, hold on, let me complete writing this. You might be wondering, well, don't we have to pass in something else that notes that we selected it? Not necessarily. And that's why it's a little bit confusing. So if we come back up on, so recall that we want to look at this function here. It's the load existing conversation function. So that is here. So you'll notice in here that we actually are passing another input here. It's just this gr select data. Again, this part confused the heck out of me. Like it took me more time than I care to admit to figure out this piece, but it works now. So, and I think that should wrap up every single little bit of code here. So let me go ahead and shut this thing down and reopen it, because something tells me that something is like off in here. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. All right, starting up the new Gradio interface. It takes a second or two. Okay, anything failing out so far? I don't see anything failing out. All right, so let's go ahead and refresh this. Why is that not loading? That should have loaded. Here, let me do a quick test. All right. Let's see what happens here. Okay, that was super weird. Why did it not load it initially? I wonder if it's because oh, now I remember. It's because let me go back to my code here. It's because I have this called something differently. Yeah, this is supposed to be df conversation. Df chat history. Okay, that's why. That would be why. Okay, let's try this again. Let's close it out. So this should be failing out right now. Yeah, it's failing out because it can't connect. So, all right, so let's go ahead and make sure that's really killed. All right, simple typo. But again, that is why I didn't handwrite this, because there's so much going on here that we could have, even if I handwrote all this, I could have missed something simple like that, and we could have been debugging this all day. Okay, so this full thing should work now. So let's go ahead and demonstrate it. So AI's readiness for query. That's cool. That's really, really cool. All right, so let's go ahead and say that we want to start a new chat interaction here. So let's go ahead and, I don't know, write me any haiku using the voice of Jar Jar Binks. You know I was going to bring up Jar Jar Binks. Not Jar Jar Banks. Oh no. Darn autocorrect. I wonder if it's going to know it anyway. Let's see how it behaves. And so you can see here though, this is what I love. This is why I love this interface over here. Like, you know, even though this is not like, and again, okay. So you could see here, this is where it got screwed up. Like this is the kludginess I was talking about before, where these titles get really, really long because for some reason the model keeps wanting to put out this note thing. But yeah, so if I wanted to come back to this conversation, I would just click that or this or this. So like, let's really ensure this is working. So let's ask it, what is the largest city in this state? What is the largest city in this state? Okay. Now, the one thing I'm not thrilled about with Gradio in particular is when you pass in an object like this, it also does this processing thing over here, as you saw where it did that load thing. And I'm just not thrilled about that because I think it's just a little bit of a confusing user experience. I don't know a way around that, unfortunately. But yeah, oh, it looks like it got cut off because the max tokens here. But yeah, it's still working. And then so if I wanted to come back to here or here or here, and so let's really drive this home, because so we loaded the chat history, but I want to show you that you really can start from scratch with this thing. So just to really demonstrate that, so let's go ahead and just delete this thing. I'm going to delete this entire thing. Boom, gone. All right, so let's go ahead and reload this interface. Reload the interface. All right, so give it a second to load. All right, we are coming up on the end here. All right, so let's go ahead and reload. Okay, so you can see here we do have an empty interface now. All right, so let's go ahead and just keep with the state capitals theme just to keep things simple. So let's go ahead and do a few interactions. So what is the capital of Illinois? Illinois. And again, this is all using MLX behind the scenes. I could shut off my Wi-Fi right now. Obviously, that would be a bad idea because then the stream would cut out. But if I was on a train, if I was on a bus, if I was on an airplane, this would all still work just fine, which is one of the things I really, really love about Gradio. All right, so let's go ahead and ask what is the largest city in that state? Now, this obviously would not work if we didn't have that conversation history, knowing that we already talked about Illinois. So the only way this works is if the conversation history here is wired up correctly, and it should work just fine. So yeah, so you can see here, largest state is Illinois. So let's go ahead and start a new interaction. All right, so what is the capital of Missouri? I was actually ashamed to admit that I screwed this one up. For some reason, I thought it was St. Louis. It's not St. Louis. Like, my fourth grade teachers are probably tearing their hair out right now. But so it's Jefferson City. So like now let's go ahead and do another chat interaction. I'll come back here and ask what the largest city in the state is. So and then you can see here on the left that we do have our chat history that's populating here appropriately. And just to show you here, we could just click on each of these objects and it'll load our chat history up. So let's ask another. What is the capital of Wisconsin? Wisconsin. All right. And I've been hitting the enter button on my keyboard, but I'll go ahead and click the button over here next time to really drive this home. So let's go ahead and ask what is the largest city in that state? All right, so again, just a user interface sort of thing. You want to give the user a preferable way that they would choose to interact. I prefer to just hit the enter key, but some people do prefer to click this button over here. So let's go ahead and click the button as I just did. Okay. Okay, boom, we have that. All right, and then we should have this over here. So that is all good to go. So let's jump back to this conversation history again here. Let's ask this exact same question. What is the largest city in that state? Is the largest city in that state? All right. And there we go. Largest city in this. Oh, it's Kansas City? That's interesting. I actually thought it would have been St. Louis. Wow. In fact, let me ask that. St. Louis isn't the biggest city? St. Louis is not the biggest city? That's interesting to me. I mean, I guess I'm not really surprised, but, whenever you talk about Missouri, you usually think about... Okay, that's a hallucination there. All right, let me just use the regular internet to figure this out because I'm curious. Let's just ask my Perplexity subscription here. I'm going to just go into writing mode. What is the largest city in Missouri? All right, we're getting off topic here, but... Well, I guess it is Kansas City. Okay, well, I don't know why I apologized, but... Yeah, I guess that was a little bit of a hallucination here that we saw in this interface. Okay, but yeah, you can see that here that this all works. So we could just continue on asking questions. Write me a haiku in the voice of Hagrid from Harry Potter. I think it's just so impressive that this works on a local MacBook. And like, yeah, are the results perfect? No, they're not. But it's still, oops, sorry about hitting the mic there. They're still really good. And that's what really impresses me about this whole thing. So that worked. And then we could just continue to swap back and forth between our conversations per this thing here. So, and again, this is where I just got lazy. Like, I'm not gonna go here and code this stuff in to actually alter this. Like, I think those of you who are really ambitious out there could probably figure out how to do this, because it's really just simply going into the documentation, finding the slider interface, and trying to create a function behind the scenes that does this. Excuse me. Yeah, I'm ready to move on. So I guess one thing I do want to show here. So we started with a bare bones chat history file, and recall that we deleted the thing, and now it's back. And now it's back here with our different conversations. And just to prove it out here, so our last conversation should be the conversation where we ask about Hagrid. And yep, that is the case. And we have everything saved here. And that is it. So with that, we have officially come to the end. And let's all clap for ourselves. Yay. Because this was a really fun project. But like I said, I've said this like 10 times now. Probably more than that. I'm ready to move on. So let's talk about like what are we moving on to? So we're about to kick off summer. This is going to be the summer of RAG. So we are going to get into retrieval augmented generation this summer. So we're going to talk about things like chunking. We're going to talk about things like indexing. We're going to talk about evaluation. What is the best way or ideal industry best practice on how to do RAG? And actually in the next stream, what I want to do is actually generate some synthetic data that we can work with. And so I'm going to show how we can use the large language models just to generate your synthetic data. Now, this is just for our own purposes to be able to have something to interact with throughout this summer. But yes, this is going to be the summer of RAG. I'm calling it now. And I'm really looking forward to it. We're going to be making heavy use of LangChain. It's going to be a really cool summer. So I hope you enjoyed this series. I don't regret doing it. Like it's just worn down on me over time. But I am so thrilled that we made it to the end here and that we at least have an MVP working product. So I'm going to be in Chicago next week, so there definitely will not be a stream next week. I don't know when we will start the summer of RAG. It might be in 2 weeks. But yeah, I really appreciate you all. This has been a really fun time. I hope you had a good time, and I will see you in the next one. And I hope you have a good weekend. Thank you.